And I will quickly introduce everyone, and then we'll get right to it. So John Gay, best known as Jag, comes to us from the 313 in Detroit. I better get that right, or Eminem will be on my case. By the way, all of us have known each other for a couple of years now. We work together, we partner on many things, and we're all in different markets, and yet share the same quest to make excellent podcasts and to share that information with you. So Jag is going to talk about sound quality and microphone best techniques, staying on topic while editing. So, Jag, can you say hi or something so people know which one is you? I guess people can see the words on the screen. Yeah. Yes, thank you. Matt Kundle, coming about to us from the Great White North up in Manitoba, Canada, from the Sound Off Media Company, is going to talk to us about metrics and, more importantly, what metrics of your podcast will actually help contribute to your success. Catherine O'Brien from the New Orleans area, more specifically Baton Rouge, coming to us from Branch Out Programs. We'll talk about traps, failures, and managing expectations, thinking about podcasting as the long game. And then Johnny Peterson from StraightUpPodcast.com from the Dallas-Fort Worth area. Oh, so close to doing it flub-free. We'll talk about the other stuff, tips on show notes, audiograms, social media posts, how you can use those to boost the success of your podcast. I'm going to talk about successful podcast segments, like little tricks and tips you can do to jazz up your actual podcast, the content of your podcast. But let's go to Jag first on audio quality. John, the world is yours. Please take it away.
Thank you, Dave. You are, I love you. You are every morning show host that gets a button bar for the first time and has all the sound effects right in front of him. So we love you for it. Basically, the importance of sound quality and editing is a good place to start, I think, today. I'm happy to share a few tips with you. The biggest thing, and most of you who are in podcasting probably know this, but it's worth repeating, is have a game plan. I once had a mentor when I worked in radio teach me that doing a radio show, or in this case a podcast, is like driving a NASCAR. All you've got to do is do all your work in the pit, so when the race starts, all you've got to do is drive the car. Pretty simple, straightforward stuff. Have a plan. If you're going to start a podcast, know how many episodes you want to start doing. Know what the basic outline of each episode. And before you hit that record button, you don't have to have it scripted verbatim. You don't want to sound like you're reading a script, but you want to have bullet points set to go, just so that you know where to go. And if something veers a little too far off topic, you can look back at your bullet points, say, okay, and bring it back around. Because really, people have limited attention spans. You don't want to waste somebody's time when you have them committing time to your podcast. You want to be cognizant. Thank you, Catherine. Cognizant of their time. You know, and see, that is something we would edit out in post-production. So, as an example, I'm going to play you two clips here, sound-wise here. This is a financial advisor podcast that I was recording, used with his permission. This, to speak to the editing piece of it, some people have this mindset of, hey, let's just hit record, whatever comes out of the microphone, great, we're just going to post it. Here is what editing that the five of us and many other folks do, or maybe you edit your own podcast. Here is the difference editing can make. Here is the first clip of myself interviewing a financial advisor.
I think so. So let me ask you this then. You said that it doesn't always work and makes sense to use an annuity, but why should people use annuities, and what are the advantages of doing so?
I'm sorry, you have to repeat that. For some reason, Siri kicked in.
Oh, okay.
Took over the controls.
So, Philip, you mentioned why sometimes an annuity isn't always the best move, but why should people use an annuity? What are the advantages to doing so?
Well, there's several fold. One is that on an equity index, you can get some market performance or participation without any downside risk.
So that's the before clip. And aside from the fact that we're talking about the thrilling topic of annuities, that is pretty painful to listen to if someone's committing time to your podcast. Here is the same clip, much shorter, edited. Philip, you mentioned why sometimes an annuity isn't always the best move, but why should people use an annuity? What are the advantages to doing so?
There's several fold. One is that on an equity index, you can get some market performance or participation without any downside risk.
That was it. That whole thing shortened, all the ums, Siri jumping in. Hey, let me think about this. What was I saying? That before and after really makes a difference in your editing. And the last tip that I want to share with you, if I'm able to share, yes, I am able to share this. Let's see here. The podcast microphone that I always recommend. Can you see the microphone, everybody?
Yes, we can.
This is the Samsung Q2U. The 5 of us have discussed this on many of our Zoom meetings. The Blue Yeti is the best marketed podcast mic, and the worst thing for a bad product is good marketing. The Blue Yeti, if you have one and you're stuck with it, so be it. If you have one and you're stuck with it, you can make it sound great, terrific. If you have one and you're stuck with it, make sure you're talking to the side of it, not the top of it. This is a cheaper microphone, and the difference between these microphones, I'm not going to get too technical, but essentially is the guts of the microphone. The Blue Yeti is a condenser microphone, which is designed to pick up all the noise in your room, all the background, the cars driving by, the dog barking in the next room. The Samsung Q2U is what's known as a dynamic microphone, as you see here, instead of a condenser. A dynamic microphone is built to pick up more of your voice and less of the background. So if you are recording in your office, if you are recording in a less than ideal environment, if you're not in Lady Gaga's $20,000 recording booth, this mic will sound a lot better, and you will be in much better shape with a dynamic microphone than a condenser microphone. So those are 3 tips on making your podcast sound great: editing, planning, and having the right microphone.
Jag, when you use the Q2U, I know it's pretty much a plug and play. Do you recommend that people wear headphones that they plug into the microphone while they're recording a podcast?
1,000% yes.
Yes. Okay.
If it's a solo podcast, maybe not as necessary, but you also want to monitor what's going into your microphone. And more importantly, if you have other folks in the room with you, or if you're on Zoom or Squadcast or Riverside or any of the other podcast remote recording platforms, there's going to be an echo that comes out of your speaker. And then they will give you an option to turn the echo off. The problem is, as cool as that feature is, if you turn the echo off and you and your guest both speak at the same time, you will lose the audio on one of you. Just like on Zoom, if 2 people talk over each other, it will, what they call, duck the audio out from one of you, and that won't work. If you're both on headphones, you don't have to turn on the echo cancellation, and you're both recorded on a separate track, and you're golden. No matter how many times you talk over each other, you can fix it in post.
Very good. Any questions for Jag? Jasmine, I see you have a question in the chat. Do you want to unmute yourself and ask that question?
Yeah. Can you hear me?
Yep.
I can.
My son, he does some podcasting, so he gifted me a J Lab. I guess that's a mic. I don't know.
Is it a headset? Jasmine, is it a headset or is
It's
it a
just
microphone?
like a plug. It's a plug microphone.
Is it like a USB plugs into your computer?
Mhm.
Okay.
I think the difference is, I can speak into it, but I have to unplug it to replay because I can't hear. I can only speak into it.
Oh, I understand. Yep. Okay. What I like about the Samsung Q2U that I just showed is it's got a headphone jack on the back of the microphone. So you plug the headphones into the microphone, and thus the microphone becomes your headphones and your microphone. JLab Taco USB microphone.
Oh, well, never mind. It has that.
Glad we could solve that for you.
Duh, but it's a different plug, so I didn't see that. Sorry.
No,
That's
and you know
okay.
what? And honestly, there are many things about microphones they don't explain well. The Blue Yeti, when you get it, doesn't say talk into the side, even though you're supposed to. The Samsung Q2U has a volume button on the bottom for up and down, but the volume is not for the microphone. The volume is for the headphones that you plug into it. Samsung Q2U also comes with an on-off switch, and I can't tell you how many times I've had a client come to me and not know that there's an on-off switch. So I don't feel bad about that. There are no dumb questions, and anything we can do to help you on your podcasting journey, we're happy to do.
Very cool. All right, we'll move on.
Dennis has his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Dennis, please. You can unmute yourself. Still muted.
Jagged, is it important really to unmute yourself before you do a podcast?
That's a good place to start. Yes.
Okay. Now, you may notice, I don't know if you can see me in the video or not, but you may notice I'm wearing a headset that has a microphone right with it. What's the difference in quality between a microphone like this, or a headset microphone combined, and what you were just suggesting to us? And which do you prefer?
Generally speaking, the headset microphone is, and again, it's a little technical here, but it's going to cut off a lot of frequency above 7 or 10,000 hertz in your voice. So you may notice that Dennis, as he's speaking, has a little bit of that electronic sound, a little bit, where it's a little bit, I don't want to call it robotic, and I don't want to insult you, Dennis, and say you sound robotic, because you sound like a human being, but there's a little bit missing from his voice in terms of the higher end frequencies, which create clarity in the human voice. The vast majority of those headset mics are going to lose certain frequencies in the human voice, whereas that dynamic USB microphone is going to keep it true, so that if you record into it, you'll actually sound like you're in the same room. If we were to close our eyes and hear Dennis speak, we'd know he was on a headset. With these microphones, you wouldn't know that. It would sound pretty true to the actual voice.
Great. Thank you very much, Jack. That helps.
All right. I'll go next, and my topic is better podcast segments, or compelling podcast segments. I'm going to just give you 4 examples of segments that I've worked on. They're not necessarily my bright ideas, but they're worth sharing, because I think they're simple ways of jazzing up an interview. Now, most podcasts are an interview, and so the question is, how do you jazz things up to bring people in and to make each show as compelling as it can possibly be? I am hearing that squeaking sound. Is anybody else hearing that?
Anybody who's not speaking should probably be on mute, I would think.
Yeah, I thought I muted everybody, but all right. Now's a good time to mute everybody. Check. Okay. We found that mouse and we extinguished him. All right. So first one, I'm going to call out a couple of my friends here. It gives me a good opportunity to shout out some people that I work with, and one is Joyce Garber. I can't remember if Joyce is on the line right now. If you are, Joyce, then hello, and long time no see. We just recorded a podcast this afternoon. Anyway, she has a great show called The Canna Mom Show. Did a great interview with this woman, Holly. And we started doing something this season which is so simple, and yet to me it does make a difference in how the podcast opens. What we do is we take an exemplary quote from whoever the star of the podcast is, in this case the guest, Holly, and we put it right at the beginning as kind of a cold open, and I'll let you listen to what it sounds like. But first, I'm going to go back and make sure that I shared my sound, because I don't know if you guys do, but I always forget that. Okay, I did, and take a quick listen.
I said, are you currently getting calls from cannabis establishments that need help? And the lady that picked up my call, she's like, you know what? Let me tell you something. This industry needs you.
And then right into the show open. And so by now we know the interview is about this woman named Holly. We might know a lot about her, might not know anything about her. We know it's her that's the guest, because that's in the title of the podcast episode. And we just heard a quote. Now, it's okay that we don't know exactly what she was talking about. We know there's something there that's going to spark our interest. So I don't know what the rest of my podcast super friends call that, teaser quote or exemplary opening quote or something like that. But at any rate, that's one you can use pretty easily. The next one, I'm always looking for fun things to do with my guests. I know you guys are too. I developed a segment that is so simple. It's called Good Stuff, and you can do it with any guest. It's just I have the guest recommend something good that they can share with the audience. So I tell them that can be a good book you just read, a good app on your phone, a good charity, and I'll give you an example of what that segment sounds like on. This was Dennis, you were my guest on this podcast, I think. You and Robin. Here we go. I promised a round of good stuff, so let's get to it. Let's do it.
Oh, that's the good stuff.
I'll recommend a show. Have you guys seen Yellowstone? It's not new, but
it's not new. I have seen some of it, yes.
It's the Kevin Costner project, which you can find on Peacock TV. I'm going to play a little bit of the trailer here for Yellowstone Season 1.
You don't act like the man from the stories I've heard.
That's the thing about being a grandfather. I get to do all the things I wish I'd done with my children.
All right. So couple of things there. One, it's cool because you get all the guests involved. You could hear Dennis and Robin kind of commenting, oh, yeah, I've seen that show. And then afterwards, we kind of all talked about what we liked about it. Doesn't have to do with the topic of the rest of the show. If it can be connected to it, it doesn't have to be. And so it's a fun way. The use of the B-52 song is done without copyright permission. I don't recommend you do that. I'm still not sure why I'm doing it. I'm not perfect, but I really like it, so I'm going to leave it in until the B-52s come after me. However, I will point out that the use, if someone recommends a TV show or something that you can drop a clip from and play on your podcast, I'm not a copyright lawyer, but I do have a law degree. There's an element called fair use in the law, which means if you're doing something for the purpose of criticism or commentary, that it's an okay use, and the people at NBC should be happy that we're using a clip from their show anyway. So please feel free to steal that one. I'll give another quick example. Evan Shine is on the line, I believe, has a great podcast called the Shine On podcast. It's primarily deals with divorce law, but Evan's really great at coming up with new elements to add to his show. And he said, what if I want to do like a quick, 90-second editorial about something? And I said, that's great. And Evan said, well, can we call it the Shine On Spotlight? And I said, that's great. And this is what that sounds like. Evan, you have selected an issue to focus on today in this edition of the Shine On Spotlight.
The Shine On Spotlight.
Dave, on this episode, we're going to shine a spotlight on former Supreme Court Judge Matthew Cooper. Effective December 31st, 2021, the great New York County Supreme Court Judge Matthew Cooper has retired from the bench as a New York State Supreme Court.
Usually lawyers kiss up to the judge while they're still on the bench, but Evan came up with the idea of doing it after he left the bench. No. So but that's just a cool little to me, these are like guideposts in the course of a show. And my favorite podcasts I listen to, I know that this is coming, or they're going to play this game next, or this little shtick is at the end, and so I'll stick around for it. So I really think those are good ways. And if you're ever wondering when you're talking to your guest and you're on minute 57 of the interview, if it's boring, it might be boring. It might be boring. So I think there's always a couple of ways you can jazz things up. I'll give you one final example. I do a music podcast called Past Tense, and we needed a way to, each week we go back in time and we look at the top 10 Billboard hits in a given week, and we needed a way to grade the week. So we started grading it A through F. We love this week, we give it an A- or something, but we wanted to get more creative. So this is what we came up with. Hopefully you at least get a little kick out of this. Yeah.
All right, Dave, listen, we've reached the end of the pod. Of course, this is our time to give the podcast a rating within our rating system, which, as you know, is our regular sort of A through F. A is for Aerosmith. B is for Bee Gees.
Well, you can tell by the way I use my walk.
C is for Carpenters. D is for Damn Yankees. And, of course, an F for Frank Stallone.
Frank Stallone gets no respect. So the message, that's kind of wacky example of a regular segment, but once you have that, if you take the time to stitch together a sound sting like that, once you have it, it's easy just to plug in again. So it kind of makes your life a little easier. So I'll stop there. Any questions on that? Oh, thank you, Jag. Benchmarks is what we call. Okay. I need someone from the old radio days. Believe it or not, I'm not. Okay. If you have questions along the way, please do put them in the chat
I do have a question.
Go ahead, Jasmine. Yeah.
So for a beginner like me, where do you get all those sound bites from?
The internet.
Seriously?
Yeah, most things you can steal from the internet, and and I say steal, there's nothing illegal about it. There are websites where you can convert. What you want to do is search for something that says convert from YouTube to MP3, and then it's very easy to just cut and paste a link, and you can get a sound file right from a YouTube clip. That's how to do it for YouTube. If you're trying to download it different ways or record it different ways, then it's kind of a different conversation. But I don't know if any of the Super Friends use anything different. But Catherine, you're about to say something?
I was going to say that there are some free or public copyright-free soundboards online that you can find too. So the thing I would be looking for is either copyright-free, public domain soundboard, and you can find some drops that way. I am not an attorney.
Yeah, see, I'm the one with the law degree. I'm the one that's always skirting the law. Anyway, Catherine, since you have a hot mic, would you like to go next?
Well, yeah, but I'm not going to talk about some bad things. So I was hoping somebody else would talk about some of the good stuff. So maybe Johnny could go.
I can
next.
go.
All right. Sorry. Johnny Podcasts, all you.
All right. We're going to talk about three things in my segment. We're going to talk about show notes. We're going to talk about audiograms, and we're going to talk about social media posting for you social media users. So when we talk about our show notes, for those of you who don't know what those are, that is when you click into your favorite podcast episode and you see the description in text for that specific episode. Now, how do you set yourself apart from other podcasts? By utilizing your show notes. When you look at a standard kind of interview podcast, you'll normally see sort of 2 paragraphs. Hey, this is who my guest is. They are working at blah, blah, blah company, and here are 2 or 3 things that we talked about. We need to offer them, the listener, a lot more than just those 2 paragraphs. So I'm going to offer you some tangible things that you can incorporate to your podcast right now. The first one is listing out your call to action. What do you want the listener to do? Do you want them to subscribe to the show? Do you want them to visit your website? Do you want them to follow you on social media? Pick one of those things, put it right at the top of your description. That way everyone sees it, and make sure it's only one thing. We don't want to bog everyone down with too many tasks to go do along with listening to your podcast. Secondly, we want links to everything relevant regarding your guests. That's their social media accounts, their website, their own podcast, anything that's relevant to that person that they're talking to. Your listener may be so interested and so infatuated with that guest that they have to know where they are online. Make sure that it's really easy to find them. Thirdly is time codes. So you can actually mark down every single time that you have a change in the conversation. And if you put them in brackets, in parenthetical brackets, on Spotify, the listener will actually be able to just touch it and jump right to that part of the episode. So anytime you switch topics, you ask them a new question, you can put that down. And as we're talking, you're seeing that we're expanding our show notes so much that you really haven't done any extra work. You've taken a little bit of extra time, but you haven't recorded anything new. You haven't done any extra editing. But your podcast now is so much, it just looks so much better and looks so much more professionally done than the guy who just has, the 2 paragraphs that we talked about at the beginning. Second to last thing on your show notes is hyperlinking important stuff that was mentioned in the episode. That's books that you discussed, podcasts, maybe the link to the weekly chart from David's music podcast. Hey, here's the link to that week's chart from 1989. And then finally, link all your extracurriculars at the bottom. If you have a consulting business, maybe you sell a product, maybe you are like Shine and you're a lawyer, you want to help people get in touch with you, make it really easy for people to find you as well. So we're putting all of those into our show notes. And then I will share a link in the chat of a podcast that you can use as a reference, just to look at their show notes and see what they've done. Next thing is audiograms. Everyone's seen audiograms before. You look on social media, hey, check out my new episode of my podcast. Here's a 30-second clip of a preview or a tease of that episode. And you're wondering to yourself, well, how do I make those? Do those even matter? Yeah, they can work for you if you do them correctly. So when we're talking about our audiograms, you want to keep them capped at about 90 seconds. You can't expect someone, especially in today's day and age where we all have the IQ span of a goldfish, you can't expect someone to sit online for 3 minutes and listen to the teaser and then go listen to your podcast episode. So keep it around 45 to 90 seconds. And we want to use what is the most compelling part of your episode, something that causes you, when you're going through it, because you're picking the clip, something that causes you to laugh, cringe, cry, or think about. That's your hook. That's the most compelling part of the episode, and that's what's going to get someone to click that link and listen through to your episode. You can use these audiograms to promote the launch of new episodes. You can actually re-promote older episodes, get people really interested in your older content, or you can even tease episodes that aren't out yet. It doesn't just have to be posting it once on the day that that episode goes live. Finally, there are really easy ways for your guests to share your content on social media. So if I had David on my podcast and I give him a 30-second teaser and I ask him to share it on his Twitter, I now have access to his audience. And here's the website that I use for all of my social media audiograms. It's called veed.io, and I'll put it in the description. The basic plan is $144 annually, so it's $12 a month. Really, really affordable. They offer both video and audio file integration, and you can get really, really creative with it. You can do automatic transcriptions, so it will put out whatever your audio is in text, and you can edit that text because we all know AI isn't perfect. But you can do multiple layers of photos. You can do a headshot of your guest, your podcast cover art in the corner. You can make it really, really pretty. It's very intuitive, and they make it super, super simple. So that's a little bit on Audiograms, and we'll wrap up with just a quick rant on social media. The best way to grow your podcast is to grow one of your social media accounts and use it to drive people to your podcast. That is the number one way to grow your show. Social media has a purpose, so we need to be purposeful with how you use it. If you're really into Instagram or you're really into Twitter or Pinterest or LinkedIn, pick one of those and stick with it. You don't want to be spreading yourself too thin where you're trying to figure out all of the algorithms of 5 different social media platforms. Pick the one that you're best at, stick with it. That will drive people to your podcast. Thirdly, we don't want to just post about a new episode and then be done promoting it. Studies show that only about 50 to 60% of your followers will see a given post. So if you're only posting about your episode once, half of the people that follow you aren't even going to see it. And then finally, when you're determining how do I grow myself online, well, you want to align yourself with who your podcast listener is. So you need to ask yourself, who is the ideal person? If I had to create this fictional person that listens to my podcast, where do they hang out online? Are they more likely on Twitter? Are they on Instagram? And then within those segments, where on those platforms are they hanging out? So find those communities of people, engage with them, and not with just promoting your podcast, but whatever your expertise is. That's why you're hosting a podcast. You're really knowledgeable, you're really interested in a subject. Find out online where those people are talking about that subject online, and don't just come in ramming through the door saying, hey, by the way, I've got a podcast. Yeah, I know you never met me, but go check it out. Engross yourself with those people online, build up a reputation for yourself, and then you can push people to your podcast. So those are little things on Audiograms, social media posts, and your show notes. And I'm going to drop a couple of links in the chat.
Very good. Johnny, is the strategy of writing good show notes, I know one of them is, first of all, it's a nice thank you to your guest, I always think, to provide all kinds of contact information. So, right. And it's also a nice way that you don't have to get to it during the course of the interview and muck it up. Just say all the information's in the show notes. Is it also important for SEO? Is that the other reason why we do that? Or
SEO is helpful, but again, it's not going to be this game-changing thing. As you build up your catalog over time, it will be helpful search-wise. So you got to start somewhere. So start with episode 1, have really detailed show notes, and then over time that builds up your catalog from an SEO standpoint. But I'm not an SEO expert, so don't take that to the bank.
Yeah. Little things that help, things that you do over and over again that help a little bit. That's a common theme in podcasts.
Yeah, compounding.
If you're raising your hand saying, what's the number one way for me to end up with 10,000 downloads per episode? There is no one. There's no magic tonic. So, Dick, you had a question about monetization. I think now is as good a time as any. Would you like to unmute yourself and ask your question?
All right. Thank you very much. Yeah, we have a podcast. It's called Distraction Podcast. It appeals, it's directed toward people with ADD, ADHD.
Okay.
And we monetize it. I don't know how many of you are into monetizing your podcast, but I wondered, I just wanted to know if anybody has had experience with dynamic insertion of commercial, and also if any of you have worked with advertised cast and have any comment on them.
You are very lucky because we have the absolute resident expert, probably top in the world, at least in North America, on dynamic ad insertion. So that would be Matt.
I would like to hear about that.
Okay. So it's a good segue. So Matt, if you don't mind doing your presentation.
Well, can I just, Melissa had a question that she put in the chat, so I'll answer that really quickly. And she asked, how often do you recommend posting on social media? It doesn't matter how often you're posting on social media. What matters is that you're posting with substance. Are you offering your expertise out there? Basically, the quickest way that I'll put it is that you are an expert in topic X, give that information away for free and people will engage with that content. Or if you're not posting, find other people who are experts and engage with them in conversation in a public forum.
I also think social media posts can be something in the news could trigger something you post. Like if you did an episode like 8 months ago on Betty White and then she passes away, why not, as a tribute to Betty, say we're going to repost this, thing about Betty. We had a great talk about her career, 8 months ago. Take a listen to this podcast. And one of the nice things about podcasts is you can promote episodes that are as much as a year old or even older if you want. Okay. Thank you, Melissa. I hope that was helpful. I'm still looking for that sound effect. All right, Matt, you may take it away, and whatever answer you want to deal with the monetization question, please do. But Matt Kundle, everyone.
I'll start with the dynamic ads, and then I'll just go into the metrics part. So dynamic ads are really, really helpful if you have content that is evergreen, where a lot of people are coming into your show and downloading old episodes. And I get that that's going to be the case here with the podcast that you described, which is about ADD, ADHD. You'll have professionals on to talk about subjects, but a lot of people, and I had the stat here, it's 47% of all podcasts are actually old episodes that get downloaded. Maybe it's not yours. I mean, if you do a podcast about the Buffalo Bills, you're only going to want to hear about that story for about 2 days and put that away till next fall. And I'm glad I worked that one in. But sports podcasts, they only last about 3 days. So dynamic ad insertion is not necessarily the best thing. But when you do have content and it's evergreen and people are going right back to the beginning, it's a good idea to maybe look into getting some dynamic ads. That way, if you have an advertiser, if they go to download episode 2, they're going to get the current ad in there. And I also want to be careful not to say that it's advertising, because it doesn't have to be advertising that you can put in there. It could be dynamic content. So if you have a message that you need to deliver to your audience, such as sign up for our new newsletter, we've just started a Patreon. We're going to be hosting an event at a certain place. Use that ad spot to really promote your own items and your own wares, whether it's to sign up for the newsletter. I think a newsletter is a very important way to keep up with your listeners. So when people talk about dynamic ads, you own that inventory. Make sure that it's your content that goes in first. Maybe you've got a product to sell, or maybe you have a partner that you've partnered up with to maybe move a product or to connect with listeners. You're going to make the monetization part. You're always going to make the most money with advertising and podcasting if you do the deal yourself. There are things, I have no experience with AdvertiseCast, but I know that Libsyn has, they're about a year into it now. And I think we're looking for some solutions. They're we're kind of in a great spot here, but I think their goal is to really, is to use your unused inventory. To the spots that you're not using, they're willing to compensate you for it. It's not very big. And I don't know what it is. I was working with Spotify. They claim it's a $17 CPM. So what that means, it's like you get $17 for every 1,000 times the ad plays. That's good for a cup of coffee, maybe, for microphone repair. I don't know, maybe a beer. I don't think we're going to be able to get a car payment out of it. So generally, a lot of these companies are really there. They want to come in and they'll sell some of your inventory that's sitting about. But the reason why you do get into dynamic ad insertion is to promote your own assets. I have a podcast about radio. I would promote my voiceover business in it first and foremost. So I guess that's the long and the quick of the dynamic ad insertion, and an answer that I hope I answered the question for you.
Well, I was thinking more in terms of the dynamics. I mean, we've been monetizing our podcast for some time, and it's true that dynamic insertion ads, rep ads, they'll go 70-30. Sometimes they'll go 50-50. Like Libsyn wants 50%, And if they're paying you $15 for a pre-roll, yeah, you're right. But I was interested in whether anybody had more experience in the mechanics of it, like laying in markers and things like that. But I may experiment with it. It's kind of difficult. I've got about 700 or 800 episodes in our catalog. And so to open them up to put markers in costs more than it would be worth. But I just didn't know if you had experience. By the way, and I have to run, but one thing I did want to offer, in addition to some of the points that you were making about effectively giving listeners value in the podcast, or getting them motivated, with pre-sell and hooks and so forth. We also include, and maybe it's because of the type of podcast we have, but we also include transcripts. And transcripts can be very, very valuable. And you can either publish them on your website, which will drive people to your website, and then you can have hot links to other chapters of your episode, or other episodes, or you could have it. You could have them hot linked to your server or whatever you want to do. But there are companies out there that'll do transcripts for, $15, $20, and that can come back in a big way, especially for your advertisers. If you include their logo visual, you give them visuals on the transcript, and if they use the entire transcript, then you're actually going to hear whatever the endorsement or spot was for them as well, and you can charge for that. So just a thought. And who is it from Detroit that's on here?
That's
John. Okay, quick question.
Yes.
Okay. Lafayette or American?
Lafayette.
That's right. Okay. The rest of you will have to figure that out. I'm from Detroit.
Very quickly, Dick, to your point about transcripts, they're also great to help with your SEO because you've got the entire content of the episode.
That's
and,
right.
And now they're really big in terms of accessibility. If somebody has trouble hearing your podcast, they can read the transcript. There was Matt can probably speak to this too in his portion here, but there was a lawsuit against some big publishers for not putting transcripts out, and they sued them under ADA because they want the content should be accessible to folks. So that's something to think about too.
Yeah, I agree. And then also anybody that you're interviewing, if you give them a small piece of audio, just ask them to promote their interview on your podcast in their podcast, and that's it's earned media. Anyway, this is very nice. I hope I can join you again.
Terrific. Thanks, Dick. Great questions. Back to you, Matt.
Okay, so by the way, Jag did point out headliner.app was another great place to get some audiograms. They've just added transcription into the bundle. It's a little bit on the pricey side. I think I paid $240 for the year, but transcripts are now available in there, and I thought that was rather nice. We also touched a little bit on SEO earlier. I wanted to just mention that a lot of apps are really beginning to gravitate to your title field. So do not have episode number 5 or 10 or 20 in there. Take that out, because you are affecting search for a number of apps by having the words episode and number in there. I'm here to talk to you about metrics. I won't bore you too much with them, but I know we're all fascinated by them. So I want to debunk just a few things about them. The metric used in podcasting is downloads. It's never streams. Even though people may say it's streams or we're now streaming podcasting, there's no streaming in podcasting. Same way there's no crying in baseball. It's downloads is really the number that we look at. Your podcast host does provide very good metrics somehow in the back. Some are more detailed than others. Libsyn has very detailed numbers. Anchor, not so much, but most of them will give you some numbers. And really that data is drawn by two things: the IP address of where the podcast was listened to, and the user agent. So from the IP address, you can get things like the location, maybe you downloaded it in Canada or the United States, right down, maybe it was in Boston or Detroit. And the user agent, well, it was on a Chrome. It was a Chrome browser. No, wait, it was an Apple phone. It was, we use the Overcast app. So these are some of the ways that you can sort of see how people are consuming your podcast. It's very important, I think, to know how they're doing it. So always go in and take a look at this stuff. where people get hung up, and I find myself, I'm not a therapist, but I find myself playing one, talking to podcasters going, I need more downloads. And I think the question is, well, what is, a good number of downloads? Well, it really depends what you're talking about. If you're talking about the New England Patriots, that's going to be quite a popular podcast if you're going to be, marketing that in the Boston area. And you'll get a few downloads apparently in Detroit. If you're talking about basket weaving, that's going to be a little bit less. If you're talking about swimming, it's not going to be as popular. So you really got to look at your community and your audience, and really what's that worth. Envision, for instance, a conference. If you had a podcast about widgets, well, what's the widget conference look like? Is it how many people are in the room? What's going to be, how many people are going to show up for that? So, and maybe that's, it's not bad. Listen, if you had the opportunity, if you got 100 downloads and you had the opportunity to talk to 100 people every week, you would take that opportunity. But again, people still want to go a little bit further, and they want to find out exactly, okay, where do I rank? So this is some data that's from Libsyn. Rob and Elsie, who work at Libsyn, they share this information every once in a while. The number has changed actually a little bit, but if you get 128 downloads on your podcast, you're in the top 50%. You've actually surpassed, and that's after 30 days, by the way, you've actually surpassed half the podcasts that are out there. That's pretty good. So what's it take to get to top 20%? That would be 1,000 downloads after 30 days. And as you can see, the graph sort of, gets quite hefty from there, as it were. But again, you really should be thinking about your community and what's in that community. And listen, I know it's hard out there because people ask you, well, how many downloads do you have? And when somebody says, oh, I got 10,000 downloads, that doesn't mean anything. That just means, was that in a year? Was that in a week? Was that in a month? What is that? That's not really a complete metric. So when people ask you for that, if they say, how many do you get in 30 days or how many do you get in 90 days? That's a more realistic approach to finding out what your metrics are. In fact, the number I always sort of look at to see how a podcast is doing, I only look at the last 30 days and the last 90 days. Before that, not even sure. There's some other data that is hidden inside Apple and Spotify. So if you do get an opportunity to see your metrics inside either of these places, there are some portals that you can find out. They have consumption metrics. So this is not downloads. This is how much did people listen to your show. Apple and Spotify do compile this. Do understand, though, this is only your Apple audience. So, if you only have 40% of your audience is listening through Apple, this is the 40% that you have. And this is where you can see, where I was boring at the beginning, and in the middle, there was an ad that played and it dropped. And here's my second ad. And then I started to say goodbye, and then people left. And that's fairly realistic. I just happened to show this episode and wanted to also show that it was possible that the consumption could be over 100%. So in this case, this was so nice, some people decided to listen to it twice. But this data is available, although again, it depends how many downloads you have, but it's not the most complete. If you only have 7% Spotify downloads, it's not going to be as complete as you like. So take it all with a grain of salt. A good number for consumption is 80%, maybe 75, 70%. That's also pretty good. People got that far through it. They put the podcast down. They probably came back later. Maybe they listened to it on another device through another app. I know I find myself listening to podcasts through multiple apps. Apple charts, and this will be the last of this is a bit of a warning here about the person who says that we're number 2 on the whatever chart. Again, we're only measuring Apple users. Maybe you're popular on Spotify, which is actually becoming a very popular app to use. So, if you have Spotify, this chart, a lot of your listeners are not playing in this ballpark. I just wanted to brag that I'm number 1 on Apple Podcasts in Nigeria for performing arts, which is, this is big. I seem to have slayed a lot of podcast dragons here, but when you really think about, who this is for radio people in an English speaking country in Nigeria where Apple phones, there's not many of them. It's about a 10%, only 10% of the population has it. And people in radio are really the ones who have them all. So, and I released this on a Sunday when all these other podcasts hadn't. So I got to number 1 and I've kept this and I'm feeling pretty proud of myself. So that's my little sort of like skim about downloads and metrics. You're doing better than you think. And a lot of people are going to say, hey, how many downloads do you have? Especially if you ask for a guest, the guest wants to know how many downloads you have. Do not start to compare any of these metrics against Facebook impressions, Twitter impressions, YouTube, anything. These are physical downloads. They don't compare against any of the other social media junk out there. So don't get into it with trying to run these numbers up against Facebook and not think you're getting any ROI.
Thank you, Matt. Any questions for Matt? Did I miss any? Joyce, please unmute yourself and you're on the air.
Thank you. This is actually, that's really useful. So I am a sponsored podcast, and for years, like Dave could tell me, I'm like, I don't know what people are buying. Like, I don't even know what the numbers they need. So I just been throwing numbers out there. But this idea that I am in the top 50%, I mean, that's all, I don't know the rest of it, but
you're also a niche for sure. You're a niche podcast. I mean, you don't do a show just about cannabis. You do about the cannabis industry and women in the cannabis industry. So now we're talking, we're more like basket weaving in a good way,
And this week we talked about sex and cannabis, and boy, Dave had quite an earful.
You guys have no idea. It was a lot of fun. I turned red several times.
Wait. Should I be taking up cannabis?
But that's like, those numbers are so useful because I have a deck which just has like a random assortment of numbers from like Facebook, and like I've never really known what I'm selling, but this conversation has made it much easier for me to explain to people what they're getting.
Yeah, you don't want a mass audience. You want the right audience.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably going to be better down the road. A lot of advertisers are going to say, oh, how many women 25, 54 who smoke cannabis listen to your show? That sort of attribution is not available because it's only an IP address and the user agent. That's all you have. It's because of privacy issues that you don't have access to that. Apple is not really in the business of giving that information back to people, and nor should they. But I know a lot of advertisers are gonna ask for it. There is a little bit of it in Spotify because people have agreed to it. So if you do get into the Spotify for podcasters, you can sign up for an account and perhaps look for your podcast in there. It is a bit of a back portal. And not necessarily easy to do. I don't want to give people like jobs to do, but it is available.
Joyce, you might need me for that. I might need to log into your Spotify account.
Yeah. I mean, because I just don't have those numbers on my deck at all. I just have, I just put the numbers of 12,000 downloads. Like you said, people don't know what that means. They don't. How many episodes? It's so. This is a better.
And a lot of people listen for you're selling. That works. Do it. If it means money, do it. It doesn't have to be perfect, especially those Apple charts. Hey, you know what? If somebody wants to buy your show because you're number one in Nigeria, do it.
Right. Yeah.
But I want you to know that what goes into making this wonderful tasty sausage.
Right.
Yeah. I mean, I have had even with dispensaries. So one of the information the whole 21 plus issue in cannabis. So this dispensary was going to sponsor my show, but then they wanted me to confirm all my listeners were over 21, which I literally can't do.
Yeah.
That all kind of fell away.
I was not happy to get that question. But Joyce, I forget if I told you, and I'll share, anyone that wants can email me or anybody in the group. There's a sample deck, a sponsorship deck. And Joyce, I don't know if I showed this to you, but you might want to compare it against yours. And Catherine and Jag, you'll remember we saw this in Nashville. I forget whose it was, but it was an excellent presentation deck. I have the link. I'm being vague, but I'm happy to share it with you guys for those approaching sponsors. So we have plenty of time left for Catherine.
And actually, I'll talk a little bit about this when we get to that part of it, David. So
go for it.
Yeah. So of course, I'm here coming in right here at the end, and I want to tell you some of the good things about podcasting. You've heard so many good things, but there's some bad things too. And I'm going to tell you right now, if you're not thinking about podcasting as the long game, oh my goodness, you're going to be very, very sad indeed. So all of my super friends have been sharing all the good stuff, but there are some drawbacks too. And in fact, I'm going to call them some traps that you can easily fall into as a podcaster. But I also have some escape hatches to help you get out. Just to temper all the good stuff we've heard, and I'm writing off of some of what Matt said before, is that the number of downloads for the average podcast is like 147. I always tell people it's between 100 and 150. It's changed a little bit because there's more podcasts out there. But really, like Matt was saying, if you even can get 128 downloads, 147, 150 downloads, you're doing better than most other podcasts out there. If you're not going into podcasting thinking that you need at least 3 years, that's right, 3 years to build your audience, then you're really not thinking about the scope of podcasting. We now have 2 million other podcasts that you're competing with. Even the podcasts that are quote dead, maybe they aren't putting out new episodes. That doesn't mean that they don't have content that people are looking for. A lot of times people will have people listening to their very first podcast from years ago. People are still consuming that content. And then plus, to make a good podcast, you have to invest your time, which is probably your most valuable asset, plus the treasure to do that. So you want to make sure that you're getting the most out of your podcasting experience. So let's talk about some of the traps that you can fall into as a podcaster. Are you getting into podcasting for the money? Oh my goodness. If you're thinking about monetizing right off the bat, or, this is your get rich quick scheme, then I have some really, really bad news for you. It's going to be a long journey for you to be a podcaster. I sometimes joke that I've been noticing a podcasting to crypto pipeline. I've noticed a lot of people abandoning podcasting and getting into crypto. And I'm like, oh, these are the get rich quick guys. I have now identified. So there is a portion of people who came into podcasting thinking this is going to be just nothing but money. And it's really, that's not going to be what you're going to be looking for right off the bat. There's plenty of opportunities to monetize, but you really have to be building a good foundation to start with that. Your escape hatch from this trap is to first think of your podcast as a catalog of your content, your ideas, your perspective, the things you know, your expertise, and to believe that that content has value. If you go into it just thinking that you're building something with having your podcast, I think that that is going to be a mindset that's going to serve you well for that long run, for that time that you're having to build the audience and the 3 years that you're having to go, not getting the downloads and the results necessarily that you want. I also really recommend to people to think of a podcast as a self-sponsorship opportunity. When we were hearing that question from Dick, I was thinking, man, like, again, Matt was saying, if you are thinking of this as, I am going to be able to sell my expertise or my products and services, or act as a connection to, like an affiliate to things that I can truly endorse. I find that's going to be, for most of the clients that I've worked with, that's going to be the place that they're able to bring in more money from the podcast, is if you have that attitude of self-sponsorship first. And then finally, of list building. I can't tell you how important it is to be list building as a podcaster. People still make purchases based off of emails that they receive. So if you have a podcast, it's very important that you have an email list and that you're doing something to get people onto your list, because that's the way that you're going to be able to stay in touch with the people, the committed audience that really wants to be a part of what you're doing. Trap number 2, worrying about downloads. Oh, Matt Kendall, like you were just saying, if you're fixating on a measurement that really doesn't even matter, the thing that I recommend to people to really focus on instead of the downloads is to focus on engagement. Are they hearing from people? Are you asking to hear from people? Are you interacting with people on social media? That is the thing that's going to tell you if you are connecting with an audience, if you're connecting with people. It's not necessarily the downloads, but the people who have listened to it. Are they making that next step of connecting to you and really engaging with you? And if you're putting out a call to engage with people, that you're hearing back to them.
And Catherine, can I jump in for a minute there? Yeah. I love this suggestion, and I don't take it to heart enough. If you post something on social media, say on a Facebook page, and a bunch of people, half a dozen people, even if they're just your friends, say, hey, that was a great episode, blah, 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 or I can't wait to listen to this. They make a little comment on the next episode of your podcast, read them, to give a shout out. Yeah, you give it proof that it's the integrity of your show there. It really makes you seem like a legit show, even if you just started. There are 6 people who already are ambassadors for your show, and they're going to spread the word.
It's, there's a lot of podcasts that use the technique of reading reviews, positive reviews that they've gotten for that exact same reason, because it's saying there's a whole crowd of people that are enjoying what's going out. So yeah, there's a social proof aspect to that. Absolutely. When I say properly promoting your show, it's not just a marketing thing. There's a dirty little secret, especially that I've seen in podcasting. It really doesn't matter in some ways if you have any downloads at all. When you're out there showing that you have a podcast and that you're engaging in a popular and tech savvy type of medium, that conveys something to people. If you're an attorney, and I was thinking of Evan specifically about this, that a lot of law firms and a lot of other attorneys are not tech savvy. So you have just set yourself apart by saying, not only am I an attorney specializing in my field, but I also am doing this other thing. I'm having this podcast. Podcasts are they're happening, and what have you. And it's just a great way to demonstrate to people that you're in the arena. You're making something, you're creating something. And that, even if people don't actually download your show, that is conveying something that I think is very important. So that's a little bit more of a dirty secret and a little bit of a sort of a positioning question, but I do think it is very valuable. And it's something that I underestimated a lot of my clients would be really looking for. So just really make sure that you're putting it out there, that you have a podcast and that you're doing it. And finally, the third trap, and this is more important than ever, is failing to know your audience. And Joyce, I'm specifically, you set me up perfectly for this. Knowing who your audience is far more important than I ever appreciated. We have been really hearing from people who work with sponsors. That's different than advertising. The differentiation there would be advertising is for a wide audience. Sponsors are looking for a particular niche. If you know who is listening to your show, you are going to be able to do so much more in terms of sponsorship for your podcast. The way that you know this, you get out of this trap of not knowing your audience or discounting how important that is again, you're interacting with your audience. You're doing listener surveys, whether it's contests or giveaways, or you have some sort of prize for filling out a survey. If you can start compiling the information about who it is that is listening to your show, first of all, you're going to find out that, one of the reasons that people are flocking to working with podcasts is because the podcast audience is extremely desirable. They're responsive. They're generally better educated. They're generally more affluent. So this is an audience that people want to connect with. But if you can articulate who is listening to your show, it is far more important to a valuable sponsor than how many people are listening to your show. I actually have an example of a friend of mine who was able to connect with a product that he feels very passionately about. He does not have a lot of downloads at all, but because he knows the demographics of who is listening to his show, he was able to get a sort of a baby step, first step relationship with a sponsor with a product that he really cares about for a sponsorship for his podcast. So those are some escape hatches for the very common traps that you might be designing to fall into.